In this video, we're going to have a look at the clip editor. So you bring up the clip editor by selecting a clip node, and in this video we'll look at the Properties tab. In a separate video we'll look at the Events tab. So first of all, what is a clip node? It's essentially a container for an animation that lets you do additional editing and settings for how that animation plays back in the game. In this case, we have a run loop assigned, and we can change it by using this choose button here. It brings up a select animations dialog, and we could pick from any of the animations defined in the animations folder. And first, let's start by looking at this raw animation file. So I'm going to double click this field, and it takes me to the animation editor, and you'll see a set of fixed properties. I can't change any of this stuff, but it's some read-only properties about it. And if I play it in the viewport, you can see it's a single cycle of a run loop, nothing more. So using the parent button here, it'll take me back to the clip editor, and the first property we'll look at is the playback mode. You can see I've got this set to loop, so let me simulate this in the viewport and we'll have a look at how this loops. You can see it's taking that raw animation and looping it over and over to give us a smooth run cycle. So the other playback modes we'll look at, this single play does one cycle through and stops. You notice that time is continuing to advance here, but the animation only played once and stopped. There's also a ping pong mode, which goes back and forth. The easiest way to see that is just to play it. It goes forward once and then backwards. Ping pongs back and forth. Last mode is user controlled. This takes a single point in the animation duration and holds at that time. So it takes the animation duration up here at the top, 0.9 seconds, and below it shows a new timeline, which is the user control range, which is a value between 0 and 1. And so if I wanted to go halfway into the animation, I'd set it to somewhere around 0.5, and you can see his feet are halfway through that cycle. And if I simulate, again, it just plays that one point in time and holds it there. So the usual way you use this is by assigning a variable to that property and allowing the game to manipulate the user control point. And we'll talk about how to assign variables in just a minute. Alright, so I'm going to set this back to loop. The next thing we'll look at is this table of properties here. Each of these properties can be set to a fixed value, meaning it's set in the behavior and hard-coded in the game, or you can change it to variable using this drop-down, and if you change it to variable, it becomes settable by the game code. So let's go through these properties. Let's start with crop start. It defaults to 0, which means no amount of time is cropped off the start, but you can change it, and we can set it to 0.1. And you'll notice it moves, it draws the timeline differently. There's a widget here for the crop start, which you can click on and drag, and that sets the property graphically. You can do that for any of these properties. There's always a widget up here that lets you set it. Also note that if you want to reset these to their defaults, you can right click the spinner arrow and that will always reset the value to its default, or you can right click the widget and that goes back to the default. So let me crop off about 1/10 of a second here and let's simulate that, and you'll see there'll be a little bit of a skip in the run cycle since we've lopped off part of it. You can do the same thing with crop end. Drag this in and now we'll see a bit of a bigger skip in it. Alright, let's reset those to their defaults by right-clicking on them. There's a start time property. This is only used in looping clips, but it controls at what point the cycle of the loop begins. So I'm going to set this to 0.2 seconds. You notice his feet are at a different position. If we look at it at the start, his right foot is forward, but if I drag this forward, his feet will be starting in a different position. If I simulate, you'll see it still smoothly plays the loop, but it just starts at a different point. Let me reset that. And we can also specify a duration. So this little chunk of the UI here, durations, shows you that the raw animation HKX file has a 0.9 second duration, and right now the clip matches that. That's because we haven't overridden it at all. If you use this property, let's change it to say 1.5. So now the animation will play, the clip will play for 1.5 seconds, but it will take that 0.9 seconds of animation time and map it to 1.5. So it's going to play slower. So here we go. You can see he's running a bit slower. And this widget down here on the timeline lets you change that. So if I drag it, if I drag it less than a second, he'll start to go faster. Or you can drag it out and make him go slower. So it's a way to precisely set how long one cycle takes. So I'm going to reset that. And there's another way to change the how fast it plays, and that's this playback speed multiplier. So let me simulate this one, and I'll change the playback speed to say 2. You notice he goes twice as fast. Or if I change it to say negative 0.5, you'll see he goes backwards half as fast. You can also control this property via a variable. So you do that by changing the value type drop down to variable, and this dialog comes up to let you pick one. I'm going to name mine PSM for playback speed multiplier, and now that's assigned. By double clicking this field I can edit the variable. So I'm going to change the default value to 1. That's the value it uses when the simulation starts. I'll change the maximum to 3 and the minimum to say 0.1 so that it can't go all the way to 0 and completely stop. If I press the parent button here, I can get back to the clip and simulate, and so now it looks normal because it's the value of the variable is 1. I'm going to come in here into the variable editor and crank this up to 2, or crank it way down to 0.1 and have them go real slow. Any of these properties can be set via variables. If you want to change it back to a fixed value, just change the drop down back to fixed. One other thing I'll mention is that there are some controls up here to change the display of the timeline. You can use the zoom tool and zoom in and out. You can use the pan tool to pan back and forth. And you can use the zoom extents tool to zoom the full extents of the animation time. And then the select mode lets you manipulate the widgets. Now you can actually, using the mouse buttons, you can do all these modes, zooming and panning anyway. If you just right click and drag, you can zoom in and out. And if you middle click and drag, you can pan back and forth. So normally you can just stay in this select mode and still get all the functions of zooming and panning.